Welcome to Let's Be Perfectly Queer,
a queer podcast creating space to talk about all things queer.
My name is Archie.
And I'm Katie.
And we are your hosts.
Questions of how you identify, seeking answers to clarify. Whether you're queen
or somewhere in between, let's be perfectly queer.
If you didn't know, we are from Perth, Western Australia.
Yeah, fun fact.
Yeah, I had someone comment on our Instagram saying, oh, you guys are from Perth. I'm like, yeah.
It's
Yeah,
true. I don't think we've got it on anything specifically that we're from Perth, Western Australia, do we?
I think we have it on our Instagram. That's something we might need to look into, and if we don't have it, we need to fix that up.
Nah, so people can't find us. We could be from anywhere.
This episode is loosely inspired by Folkier's suggestion on Apple Podcasts and the whole cancel culture within the queer community. So this links to cancel culture.
Okay.
Okay, kind of. Anyway, when I Googled cancel culture, this was one of the first things that came up, and I thought it was quite interesting. Before we get into the episode, what is one way to encourage an LGBTQIA plus audience to watch your movie, television shows, and sell albums?
Have sex in it. Queer sex. Have some queerness in it.
Have queerness in it. Why queer sex? This is what we were talking about last episode.
I know.
So yeah, to have some queerness in it, to have representation in it. This is where the whole idea of queer baiting has come from. And I'm going to explain what that is a little bit more. Before we get into it a bit more, have you ever heard of a thing called pink economy or pink money?
I would have thought that that's associated something with women.
No.
Oh, no idea.
It's the purchasing power of the LGBTQIA plus community with media, music, and how much revenue comes from within that community. So we just can kind of understand when I talk about pink economy, when I talk about pink money, that's what I'm talking about. This episode is about queer baiting, and we're going to go and look into that. So the term queer baiting, it's been around for a very, very long time. So scholars came up with the term queer baiting in the early 2000s to talk about the superficial and tokenistic use of LGBTQIA plus characters in fictional shows. There's some controversy because some people also believe that the term originated on Tumblr. With Tumblr, it's a massive fan community, and they called out shows for doing something. They called it queer baiting.
When was this? Back in like the 2000s?
Early 2000s.
Okay, cool.
But prior to that, the term queer baiting was meant for harassment, abuse, or targeted provocation of gay people. So the meaning has changed. So what we're currently talking about is not the early 1968-72 version. We're talking about the 2000s version of what queer baiting is. So queer baiting is where movies, media, and TV shows attempt to attract or engage a queer audience by implying LGBTQIA plus relationships or attraction without actually having real queer representation. Instead, they are just using the audience for views and making money by targeting that specific audience.
Yeah, that makes sense. So if you're coming into it thinking that you're going to get representation, you watch it and there's maybe the ghost of a hint and that's it.
So in essence, it's really just a really good marketing strategy. And it's a shame that it's a marketing strategy that's targeted at the LGBTQIA plus community that can be quite harmful.
Yeah, because it's just clickbaiting for us.
Yeah. You know, because as an LGBTQI plus community, we want to see real representation. And when a TV show, a movie, or something hints at that representation, they're playing with our emotions in essence, because we feel like, oh yeah, we're finally going to get real, authentic representation. I'm going to be able to see myself on screen. I'm going to be able to relate with a character on screen. And if you're an ally listening, I'm sure there's several different versions of different characters out there that you can in some way relate to. But as a queer person, we don't always have those positive, authentic relationships and people that we can say, yes, I finally feel seen. I finally feel seen on the big screen as normal. Because at this point in time, it's still almost like LGBTQIA plus character is tokenistic, is a stereotype, is just part of the subplot. Yeah,
you're so right. It being tokenistic, it's kind of similar to the Bechdel test in that you only have, you know what the Bechdel test is?
Is it that those blots?
No. I know what one you're talking about. It's like, it's a butterfly and it's just all these ink splodges.
Yeah, so what's the Bechdel test?
The Bechdel test is two women having a conversation with each other that's totally underived from any other man. It's not about a man in any other thought. And there are not many movies out there that actually even just hit the Bechdel test, saying that there doesn't have to be a man involved in any of the conversation or anything about it. And I feel like in the same way that it works for queer people is that often queer people will always have some other association that it has to be a heteronormative thing and then that we just get popped in for extra interest, like we're that little spark of interest in it.
We're the comedy relief. in a lot of movies and television shows and that kind of stuff.
Yeah, and we just want to be the normal person
Right.
rather than that like interesting sparkly thing in the corner. I know we're sparkly, but like it's fine. We can just be normal.
That's exactly it. So the most harmful aspect of queerbaiting is that it invalidates LGBTQIA plus experiences by making jokes about it or just touching on it and not going into the depth of the complication of some of those experiences. So then it can leave an LGBT person feeling less than.
I guess inadequate in some way, doesn't it? Because if you're not sitting that stereotype of what you're seeing as perceived characters on this representation, I mean, like looking into queer imposter syndrome, you're not saying what I am.
Yes.
And therefore, that's not right.
Yeah, and the thing is as well, it's some shows are guilty of touching on it and then using it as a subplot, and then it just gets forgotten. Like it's never again spoken about, it's pushed under the rug, and it's never spoken or talked about again.
Yeah, it's fair. I feel like sometimes with a lot of the Disney shows as well, are you going to chat about that?
Oh, I'm going to talk about one, and I think you know which one I'm talking about.
Yeah, I think so too. But also like some of the subplots where you look at stuff, if queerness had been more normalized, I feel like a lot of the characters would be queer. And it wouldn't be just a little hint of it. It would be, yeah, this is just a normal relationship.
Pixar movie that finally do a proper queer relationship.
I can't remember which one it is, but I know, yeah.
You were watching it. I didn't end up watching that one.
But also, do you know what I really loved?
What?
Something that goes against queerbaiting. The last Doctor Strange movie and how... I can't remember what the character's name is, but the actress America, she had 2 mums.
Yeah, so that was... Oh, crap. Let me look it up.
But I just love the fact that it was so great. She was in a multi-universe. She was from a different universe and she just had 2 mums and nothing else had to be said about it. I remember seeing someone in the comment, but it was never explained why she had 2 lesbians as mums.
Does that need to be explained that she has 2 mums?
It was just so good. It was just there. And I'm just like, even in... I was about to call it sci-fi, and I guess it kind of... Does it come under sci-fi as well? I
guess it would. Oh, America Chavez.
Yeah, she's brilliant. But yeah, I just loved that was in there. And I know that's not queer baiting at all, but that was just such a beautiful representation, anti-queer baiting, of being like, it's in there. It's normal. It's perfect. I love that. I really love that. Do more of that, Marvel.
And Marvel has been accused of some queer baiting. And we'll talk about that in a little bit as well. And we're going to look at queerness in films.
Okay.
Queerness in films wasn't allowed at some point.
What do you mean wasn't allowed at some point?
So there's a thing called the Hays Code, and it was created in America. So it was a list of principles for self-censorship in Hollywood from the 1930s to 1968. It was then replaced by the MPAA film ratings, which everybody knows, like PG, G, MA.
Yeah.
But before that, we had this thing called the Hays Code. It was 36 rules for filmmakers intended to limit the representation and normalization of characters and behaviors considered unsavory or morally corrupt. Where do you think that came from? Unsavory and morally corrupt. What kind of community is going to push that?
I mean, that's going to be the heterosexual white cis man, is that not?
Religious groups.
Looking at that pins a very specific religious culture.
Yes.
Because there is a lot of religious cultures out there.
And if you look at the clauses, one of the things is it does talk about Catholic values. With the LGBT and queer representation, that comes under Clause 6, which was sexual perversion. So any behaviour that deviated from the principal order of romance, sex and gender, characters who differed in their gender presentation and identity. So there was other things like you couldn't have nudity and liquor, and you couldn't even have violence. But these would have been some really boring
Oh my gosh, that would have been well fucked.
Within the 1930s to 1968, but that did make way and things changed. And obviously now in, 2023, we do see more representation. But unfortunately, because of this code, there is still that knock-on effect of what happened back then. And with the LGBT and having LGBT characters in films, it's still quite taboo.
Do you know what? I just want to circle back to the word perversion.
Yes.
That just puts my hackles up straight away.
I was just using the exact code that's coming up.
I know, because that's the whole thing, is that if you think about the word perversion and how it's been used in the past, it's generally talked about people part of the queer community. And I think it's fucking disgusting, because if you look at what happens behind the cameras and the amount of sexual assaults that happen behind the cameras by 6 white men.
Hollywood
in general. Oh my gosh, if you don't want to watch anything about sexual assault, don't watch the Marilyn Monroe movie. It's horrible. It's absolutely horrible. But it's that disgustingness. They look at the queer community and be like, you're perverted just for loving another consenting adult. But what they're doing and the values that they uphold, it's absolutely revolting.
Yeah, and this was started by, I think he was a senator who left Parliament and get up on his high horse and do this kind of, nope, don't agree with seeing LGBT representation and other things like liquor and stuff that went against the Catholic family views and values. And
That just comes from fear, doesn't it? Because what is it really going to do?
nothing. It's just going to make people feel like they're represented and heard, and that, hey, they are just as valuable and just as normal, quotation marks, as everybody else out there.
Do you know, I find it so funny that queer people have had to subject themselves to watching same-sex sex on TV for such a long period of time, but we don't look at that and be like, that's revolting.
And has that made a queer person straight?
Oh, never.
No. So where do people get off by saying, oh, but queer representation and television shows in the media and celebrities is going to alter the view of our children? No. Like, I grew up watching straight films, and I grew up watching you're a man, you're a woman, there's no other thing. But hey, I'm a trans queer man, and I, back in the day, would have ever thought that? No, I grew up watching people make fun of people like me.
The other thing is that when you're looking at TV shows like that, what I grew up watching is nothing to do with what I am today.
Yeah, me too.
It's not going to change my values and my set systems and all that kind of stuff. Looking at healthy relationships out there, whether they're heterosexual or homosexual, I do hate the word homosexual, but anyway, whether they're what you would derived as heteronormative or not, it doesn't matter as long as it's based around love and respect.
And communication.
And communication. I feel like there's not enough of that. I don't care what you are, who you present as. But if I want to see a good relationship out there, I want to just see a good relationship.
Let's just promote healthy relationships. And looking back at certain shows that we've rewatched and certain movies and the unhealthy depictions of relationships that were all over the screens, especially in the early 90s into the 2000s. Some of the television shows and movies were very problematic. And no, you can't have a queer person on screen, but you can show all this manipulation, gaslighting, and abuse.
It's horrible, isn't it?
Yeah. So here's one for you. Knowing all this now, when do you think the first gay kiss in film history was?
So that's a good question, because I feel like the first gay kiss would probably be putting it back to when someone's dressed up as a woman and then you have a man.
No, two men. So when do you think, especially, so we're looking at the American film industry, when do you think the first kiss was between two men in the film industry?
Probably the 1990s.
Incorrect. Would you like to know the answer?
Yeah, obviously. Don't just leave me hanging on forever.
So before the code, and so as early as
When was that?
So the code started from the 1930s to 1968.
Yeah.
So from as early as the 1920s, you saw LGBT representation in films. It wasn't overtly out there, but they had the mannerisms and that kind of thing. The first gay kiss in American film was in 1927 in a movie called Wings, directed by William A. Wellman, and it was between two American soldiers.
So really, what have we done? So we think that we're getting better, but really becoming more and more backwards. I feel like history is undoing itself in the fact that we never had any of these issues previously. We just expressed ourselves, and then somehow there's been this group of people that have come down and said, look, this is
we don't agree with this, so we're going to change it.
Yeah, I don't understand.
Yeah, so they never, in the movie, they didn't actually say that they were boyfriend thing, because one of them had a girlfriend or something. I can't remember the whole deal with it, but basically, in the film, two soldiers, one's dying, and they basically, when he's dying, they profess that they love to each other and they kiss.
Oh, beautiful.
But they never at any point say that they were in a relationship or anything. It was just normal.
Yeah, and that's how it should be.
And how did we have that in 1927 and still today we still have issues with queer baiting?
By the way, I want to find out who that director was, because that is bloody brilliant.
We need to look him up. So he was directed by William A. Wellman. So we'll look him up. Let's watch it. Let's find it. Let's find it and watch it. We'll see what it's like. But anyway, so with the code, people did find ways to sneak in LGBT themes, and that's the issue. And they were using stereotypes and toxic stereotypes to represent the LGBT community. And then that's continued on until today still. So with queer baiting now, in this day and age, we still shouldn't be teasing LGBTQ relationships and using stereotypes and then having a toxic portrayal of a queer person.
So it's like we've never really evolved past that time where we had put, even using like the different classification of movies and stuff, that we've never progressed past that openness, and we've still done those little stereotypical toxic teasers that haven't actually done anything. And it sounds like they're doing something for the queer community, but they're not.
Some examples in movies that others have said are queer baiting, or television shows. Becca and Chloe in Pitch Perfect, where, where they're almost going to kiss and that kind of stuff.
100%.
Sherlock and Watson in the television show. I haven't watched it, so I can't give enough.
I've watched it a little bit, but I don't remember having those feelings.
Dean and Castiel in Supernatural. And there's actually a lot of problematic parts to that. And right at the end, I think Castiel says that he does love him. I didn't really get that far, but there's a lot of problematic culture around that and around the cast making fun of the whole part of.
Oh,
yeah.
Did they?
Yeah, so there's a lot of problematic interviews and that kind of thing, and making fun of it all, basically mocking the fans that they've lured in being LGBT when nobody was LGBT, and they looked at the big fandom that was on Tumblr and they created the fan fictions and the shipping of the two characters. If it wasn't for the LGBT community, a lot of people would argue that Supernatural would have finished at season 5 rather than going on to season 15.
Well, to be honest, if you look at Supernatural, and granted I've not watched more than maybe about 3 or 4 seasons, I can't remember anymore, but it's not really an apt representation of any minority group.
No.
Very whitewashed.
I remember watching it at university, but if you were to tell me now, nothing really stood out to me.
It wouldn't stand the Bechdel test, it wouldn't stand the queer test, it wouldn't stand any test.
It'd be interesting to rewatch that now with a queer gaze and see what people are saying. And as well, when I was watching some of these shows back in the day, I kind of was like, oh yeah, maybe they're hinting at it, not realizing as well how damaging that can be for a young person when you think that you're being represented and it's a way to lure you in.
It's also swept under the rug. I feel like Pitch Perfect is a really good example.
That is a very good example.
That.
Yeah.
And I find that really annoying, knowing everything I know about Rebel Wilson now, is that...
And I'm going to talk about Rebel Wilson.
Ah, fabulous. Yeah. But I find that really irritating because it's basically saying that she's queer without saying that she's queer. There are so many different small references that they make that they're just like, they had so many great opportunities to actually take that character and run with it a little bit more and just... she could be bi.
Yeah, and that's the thing. They want to tease these relationships without alienating their straight audience. Yeah. And that's the problem.
And there's a huge differential between doing the baiting to normalizing it.
Yes. Just make it normal, because you're baiting and you're teasing it and you're luring in an LGBT audience to then make them feel not satisfied.
Yeah, as any teasing does.
Anyway, other examples are Xena and Gabrielle in Xena Warrior Princess.
Oh, yeah. Honestly, that whole thing. I used to watch this with my mate a lot and it was so much fun. We had a lot of conversations, because they're queer as well, of being like, no, they're 100% having a relationship. And then at the end of it, I swear, and I have to rewatch it, I swear that they did have one episode where they were in a relationship.
I think they talked about it. I can't remember. But then other ones are Dumbledore and Grindelwald.
Yeah, I thought they were gay.
So the thing is, J.K. Rowling said it at a press conference that, yep, they had sex in a book or something, but it was never, and people went back and read the books and it was not there. So some people argue that it was a massive queer bait by J.K. Rowling and the movie company to get people to go back and read the books, purchase the books, come along and see the movie to actually see proper representation, where, again, if you watch that movie, it's hinted throughout. And we went and watched that with some of our straight allies, and they agreed.
Yeah.
They talked about the sexual chemistry between it, where they were like, why didn't they just say it? We can all see it. Why didn't they just say it? But then that also comes back to, like, why do we have to put a label on things? But it's a little bit different in this essence. But it's not.
It's hiding it. That's the difference.
That's it.
This is the whole difference between normalizing it, which I do appreciate that there was a hint of representation, but it's that whole thing of having to sweep it under the rug. That whole storyline of them being in a relationship makes it feel like it's taboo, and not in a way that it's taboo because of who they were. It's taboo because they were two men together, and that makes me feel uncomfortable. Hate J.K. Rowling. Sorry, I love the books, but fucking hate her as a person.
We might cut that out because we don't want to be like,
I don't care,
cancelled by J.K. Rowling.
Non-spawn. That's fine. If we get as big that J.K. Rowling comes for us, I will love that, and I will stand up as a queer lady who's in love with a trans person and be like, fuck you.
Okay, you heard it here first, guys. And then other shows, so other things like Luca, the Disney movie, where if you did see the trailers, they did hint at a romance between Luca and Alberto. The way that it was, the music that it went alongside, the cutting. So they did it in a very clever way where some people wouldn't have even noticed, but the LGBT community who grasp at any kind of representation jumped at that. Also Frozen. Idina Menzel's been calling out for Elsa to be lesbian this whole time.
Yeah,
they
Elsa's
said, why?
gay.
So we all agree. The thing is, they still haven't talked about it. And then that song, Show Yourself, and all those hints, and they promoted that song before the movie came out, and then LGBT audience locked onto it. My best friend, who is an ally, showed me the song and said she's totally coming out as queer before I had even said anything. But then they never actually went there because obviously Frozen's too big of a franchise that you don't want to kill it. And that's the thing. It's got that shame of, why? Why do they have to say, okay, but if we do that, it's going to kill our audience?
I think that's really horrible. It is homophobia. And the second thing is, I would love it if she was just asexual. I love it if it was just like, you know what? Nah to all of you.
Like, why not?
I love that.
Other shows were Buffy and Faith in Buffy. So
Yeah,
I'm not sure
maybe.
how true it is, but apparently where Faith kisses Buffy on the head, that was meant to be a real kiss, but the two chickened out on the day. Not sure how true that is because you never really know. Also, Riverdale has got a lot of hate for how they've represented LGBT. Like, yes, they have had a lot of queer characters in that show, but it's very tokenistic and it's very base level. But if you look at the whole show, you shouldn't really take Riverdale seriously at all. So, the people have argued in that sense as well. And there's some examples that I disagree with. So people said that Falcon and Winter Soldier, and the recent Falcon and Winter Soldier, I'm like, I didn't see it at all.
No.
Rachel and Quinn in Glee, and then Grace and Frankie and Grace and Frankie. I just thought they were just healthy relationships. Oh, not the other one, but Grace and Frankie, I just thought it was a healthy example of two women who can live together. Like, I just didn't think anything about that. So if you haven't watched Grace and Frankie, their two husbands end up together and they just become up and being good friends. So they do have queer representation. So I don't really see that as queer baiting. I don't know why some people would say it. I'm very confused about that. But there's one that happened recently, not to do with the show in itself, but the promotion of the show. And it's a show that we really, really enjoyed, and I'm very sad to hear about this. So what's a show recently in the last, 6 months that we've watched, we've binged, we absolutely adored it?
We've binged so many things.
Wednesday. They've been accused of queer baiting.
I see that.
Yes.
Because Enid and Wednesday kind of had this lovely dynamic. And are they the characters that you were going to talk about?
So there's two ways they did this.
Okay, cool. So my perception is that Enid and Wednesday, especially the last bit of it, I always thought Wednesday, through that whole thing, was either going to be asexual because that runs with her character, or she was going to be bi, which I still feel like could be a thing. And then when she came out and had feelings for, which I'm just like, Wednesday
that
having
came out of
feelings?
nowhere, but that also came out of nowhere. I feel like if you were to properly represent Wednesday, her being asexual would be very simple to do and very explanatory about her behaviours and, the way she is.
Totally, because never in anything else that I've watched that has Wednesday Addams in it has been anything that about her having a relationship with anybody. She hates everybody equally. It's beautiful.
That's exactly it.
She's never gonna be that kind of person that I think is gonna be like, oh, I love you to somebody, because she doesn't love anybody.
I could also see her being asexual, and I could also see her being pansexual. She's like,
no, I don't.
If I get along with you, I like you. That's pretty much it.
No, actually, no, that's true.
I don't care what gender you are. If I can tolerate you, I'll.
Yeah.
Netflix did this in different ways, so they did put up Twitter posts saying, opposites attract and that kind of stuff. Obviously, they meant it as a friendship, but doing that, it's queer baiting.
No, that is queer baiting, because opposites attract has never been said about anybody's friendship ever.
Yeah. So then they had a picture of the two girls on each side of their bedrooms. Biggest issue that a lot of people had was, as part of their promotional thing, Netflix hosted a Wednesday with RuPaul Drag Race alumni to launch the series, heavily implying this series would be queer.
That annoys me, because I reckon they wouldn't do that now with everything that's happening about drag.
No, so it's very sad that they did all this. They alluded to a massive queer representation within the show, and then everybody felt duped.
Yeah.
Luckily, I hadn't seen all this before watching the show. Otherwise, I would have felt differently about the show. Because it's just sad that Netflix knows how much purchasing power the LGBTQ community have with views, because anything that might have some representation, they just grab it and they want to watch it, and they watch it many times over and that kind of thing. So it's just sad that still in 2023, was that 2022, that was happening.
Well, that's the thing, isn't it? It's it being in mainstream media, because I feel like we've been in all those movies and Sundance forever, which is great because it shows that we are out there, but we don't have to, even though we do take up the artistic space because we're just magical people, just marvelous. But the whole thing is in mainstream media, we don't have this representation that when we see these kind of things by big companies like Netflix, like Disney, like those, like Marvel, when we see this kind of representation in this space, it gets us really enthusiastic that there will be something normalizing it about it, and talking about those nuances of it not being some kind of taboo topic talked about, that it can just be part of who that person is, just like being straight is part of who that person is.
Yes.
Just having that normality gets taken away from it. It's just such an easy thing to do, and also will be helping the world present appropriate representation of people around the world, that it's like, oh no, we can't do that, because in one way they get so worried that people aren't going to watch it because all these people are getting on their high horses, or you're going to get the opposite direction, that you're going to be like, oh, well, we're not going to give enough of it either, so we're kind of baiting this queer community to watch this. Stop trying to be fucking Switzerland.
And there are a handful of shows that do it correctly, and I'll talk about them a little bit later. Why then, this is a question to you, why then do we still watch these kind of shows, knowing that we're probably getting baited into watching it and baited into believing there's going to be queer representation? Why do you think we still watch it?
I mean, for two reasons. You've got to watch something. And secondly, because even with a spark of hope they're getting appropriate representation, you still would want to watch something. It's that whole thing of like, until it's normalized, having something out there that does really well in trying to show you who you can be or part of the community, you want to take it and run with it.
It's that hope. You hold on to that hope that maybe, like, okay, they're probably just going to, they're doing this as a marketing thing to get me to watch it, but maybe there's a glimmer of hope that you are going to be seen and represented in this show or television show or whatever it may be.
It's true, isn't it? Because, I mean, for all our beautiful allies out there who aren't part of the queer community and that do have a lot of representation for themselves, I'm really happy for you. But growing up and not finding somebody who looks like you or who is like who you are makes you feel like you're an alien.
You know, I've talked about this in my episode of feeling alone and feeling like I was wrong. I was never represented in television shows, movies, songs, media. And so when I didn't see authentic representation, I didn't know who I was. I didn't know where I fit in the world because I kept questioning every single day from the moment that I realized I was different. Why was I that way? Why was I not like anybody I've seen on TV? Why was I not like any of my friends? And had I only had that little bit of representation, I would have felt a little bit less alone.
It totally comes down to all the different minorities that we've got out there. If we don't have enough representation of the colourful individuals that we are throughout the world, then why? And also, there's so many brilliant people out there and so many people that you can represent in different ways that aren't what we see currently on our TV screens. Why are we depriving ourselves of that culture?
Of the culture and the stories and how much further we can go with storytelling by just including other people's cultures and experiences and where we can really take beautiful stories into a new direction. And I think, you know, in 2023, it's time.
Oh gosh, it was time like 500 years ago.
You know what I mean.
Back in the 1920s.
So when we're looking at queer baiting, I think it's a safe term to use when we're talking about films, television shows, etc. Here's where it starts to get messy, and I believe that it's very dangerous. Social media and the internet and their cancel culture, they blow things out of proportion sometimes, especially when you have massive fandoms and people who are obsessed with that kind of stuff. Some people use queer baiting to describe an actual person who doesn't openly identify with the LGBTQIA plus community, but displays queer tendencies. And this is where I believe accusing someone of queer baiting can be dangerous territory, because how do we know if they're queer or not? And how do we know if they're not ready to come out yet?
Well, there's a whole difference between baiting and then having queer tendencies. It's like our topic that we discussed about gender binary and how as individuals, we don't necessarily have to sit within the specific masculine or feminine ideologies. That as individuals, you can have all these different traits within the two on this giant spectrum that it is being an individual that sometimes get depicted with being gay. So you've got a person who identifies as a man who's wearing dresses and such things, but that doesn't necessarily mean that they're queer. And just because they're doing such, like look at Harry Styles. We don't know specifically what his gender identity or sexual identity is, and why should it matter? I'm not having sex with him.
And that's the problem. So using the term queer baiting for a celebrity or a person can be dangerous because someone may be using it for marketing. Maybe they're just not ready yet to put a label on who they are, or they don't need to put a label. So there's that kind of dangerous part with that cancel culture and people trying to cancel some celebrities or people of interest because they haven't put a label on it.
Yeah.
So some celebrities who have been accused of queer baiting, and you just said one was Harry Styles, Billie Eilish, Cardi B, Nick Jonas, Katy Perry, just to name a few. Some people might be using it as a marketing ploy, and some people, they don't have to put a label on things. Do you know what I mean?
I think some people who are intense fans, if not fanatics, as the basis of the word depicts, But forget that these people are individuals behind this giant production that is their company. Because when you start looking at these personalized traits, you're going from beyond what they've developed for themselves as an actor or as a singer or as a musician or as these celebrities. You're looking at and you're critiquing the individual, that human that's at the base of that. And really, why does that matter?
So yeah, people forget about that. They forget that there's a human behind that persona. And so, yes, if a person and a celebrity and a public figure is going to do that for marketing employees, that is disgusting on them. For example, if Harry Styles is questioning his sexual identity or his gender identity, it is not up to him to owe us to tell us that. That's his own personal journey.
No, exactly. And the whole thing is that's just between him.
Yeah, so why should we cancel someone if they're not willing to open up and say they're queer? We didn't have that pressure as just a regular, everyday Joes. How would you feel if you had that pressure from thousands, if not hundreds of thousands of people to out yourself when you are not ready?
Yeah, and it comes back to, first of all, everyone has their own path that they're going to follow to what their sexuality or gender identity is. Everyone starts somewhere, everyone goes somewhere. It is fluid at times, and having the privacy to actually do all that exploration for yourself, it's not something that should be only for the normal person.
Yeah.
It shouldn't be something that we only afford. That human right is not something we should only afford for the person who happens to not be stared at by everyone.
So it doesn't matter if you're a public figure, there are still some things that you should have private. You do not owe every part of yourself to be public. And it's not fair that some of the LGBT community are asking that of other people. That's too much. You're asking them to come out, and I get it, you want to see representation, but there is representation out there in celebrities. Do not ask people when they're not ready. And this cancel culture, queer baiting, when you're talking about celebrities and people, is toxic.
It's funny because the way that we put so much emphasis and value on celebrities, I mean, the idea of a celebrity having more value than anybody else just makes me actually feel disgusting. And it's like they're indebted their whole lives, that's the agreement that they make almost with the devil, that you get the fame, but then you also get all the backlash that nothing is then your own. It's funny because I actually listened to the Shameless podcast. Great girls, lovely listening to them. And they did a whole topic on Ralph Fiennes. Ralph Fiennes is what people see his name as, the guy who played Voldemort, but it's Ralph Fiennes.
Yep.
He is very well known for, in interviews, he will never discuss his romantic life. And reporters always used to get really irritated because he is so very secluded with what his thoughts are. He has the most poise, as you would hate how poise is always depicted on women, but he has so much poise and grace when it comes to actually talking about his own private life, because he just doesn't. And I think that we should realize that that should be a standard for humans.
If they don't want to share, don't force them out. And I'm going to go into this in a little bit more detail. Overall, we shouldn't call out celebrities or people for queer baiting because we don't know what's going on behind closed doors. But there is a very terrible example of two people who did queer bait from high school. Do you remember their name? They were a Russian duo.
Tattoo.
Tattoo. Do you remember Tattoo?
Oh, do you know what? I loved that so much. And when I first saw that video, it ignited some emotions in me. I will not lie.
I'm sure it did for a lot of little LGBTQIA plus babies at the time. Do you remember them?
Yeah, I remember them in their short skirts, and they're like, it was a short tartan skirt.
They were school outfits.
Oh, yeah. Were they in a truck?
They were a Russian music duo. They were star-crossed lesbian lovers, or that's the image that they portray.
Totally. That's 100% what it was.
Yes.
And you're going to tell me they weren't.
You didn't know that? Oh, I just think I broke your heart. So basically, because I remember the day that it came out where one of them was found with a boyfriend.
That's fine. They can be bi.
One of them was bi in the end, but long story short, they were not lesbians, they were not lovers. So the band's name and image, including the duo, was created by a Russian producer named Ivan Shapovalov. Tatu, or is short for the Russian phrase ta luat tu, meaning this girl loves that girl. And it was all an act. It was all an act by the producer who found a hole in the industry where he could market to a certain audience.
Do you know what? I'm less annoyed at that. Because that's just what acting is, isn't it?
But they never said they were acting. This whole time, they queer baited the LGBT community to believe they were a lesbian couple.
See,
and that they were... And this is the thing. So there's a lot of debates forward and back because, yes, you were putting them in the limelight, your spotlight. What's the bad part is it was all an act. The two of them queer-baited people to believe that they were actually a couple when they never ever were, and it was all an act for.
I mean, that's obviously their manager and
that was
the
their manager. It wasn't them.
that
So
are doing
I'm
that.
angry at the manager, not at the two.
Also, I guess in a way of how much do we really expect musicians, what they really, their lives about? Like, I don't really look at Eminem and be like, I expect that everything in his lyrics are exactly what his history is like, which is fine because I'm not going to go and interrogate his lyrics. Not that kind of person. It's one of those things that I get less angry at that because I feel that that's more of a normal representation of what being young and being queer is about. And I feel like I get less irritated at that than I do Wednesday.
No, I get that. For me, when I found out, I was still just in my exploring the queer identity. So I felt lied to, if that makes sense.
So maybe it's because I'm finding now out as an adult then.
Yeah, so when I was still questioning my identity, where I was going, and Tattoo was all out there everywhere, I felt like I was lied to, and I felt like being LGBT was a joke.
It's almost like a ploy.
Because and looking it up, he did it because he thought it was funny. He thought it'd be funny. He'd do this kind of stuff.
Oh, I hate him.
Yeah,
I hate him.
He did it for other reasons, which I'm not going to go into, which is more about perversion and trying to. It was aimed at men who liked young girls so that's the hole he found in the market,
now.
right? So that's why
Okay.
all of this. So I didn't want to share that, but it's like, fine, I'm going to share it because that makes me angry, and I felt lied to, and I felt duped, and I felt like it was all an act, and being part of the LGBTQIA+ community is an act. That's how I felt. I was proud of these people for coming out and being who they are when they weren't. The problem with queer baiting, maybe we're overusing the term, or maybe we need to have two different terms. One that goes back to the media, and one that when you're looking at people who do it. Often it's the media who do it rather than people. Sexuality is fluid. It's personal. It's none of anybody else's business.
It shouldn't be forced.
No.
I think that's the whole thing behind it, is that sexuality is yours.
And so there's a report by the LGBTQ rights organisation Stonewall. 46% of LGBT people feel they can be open about their sexuality. 64% had experienced anti-LGBTQIA+ violence or abuse. So you can see why some celebrities do not want to come out, and they don't have to come out.
The great thing about us being able to disclose our sexuality to people at our own discretion is being safe and assessing that situation to know if somebody is potentially going to harm us. And this is the whole thing about passing as well, is that sometimes you don't want to be as open as previously because it might not be a safe environment in the world that we currently live in, unfortunately. But celebrities, if everybody knows that this is exactly how you identify as, then there's no hope for that. And not every celebrity is constantly going to have security around them. And that's what makes me scared for some people, is that not having the ability to make that assessment for itself in the world that we still live in is quite sad.
Let's look at some of those negative effects on some celebrities based on people who have accused some people of queerbaiting. So I'm sure you heard about this recently. So 18-year-old Kit Connor from Heartstopper was driven off Twitter following accusations of queerbaiting. He came back later and made a reluctant announcement. So he said this: "I'm bi. Congrats for forcing an 18-year-old to out himself. I think some of you missed the point of the show. Bye." So that's the thing. That's the
horrible.
problem about queerbaiting and cancel culture and accusing people, is you are forcing people to come out. And obviously we talked about Rebel Wilson as well. So Rebel Wilson was also forced to come out when the Sydney Morning Herald threatened to leak her relationship. Just imagine, you haven't even told your family and friends and are navigating in a new relationship and have that to worry about. The editor said you have 48 hours. And so then she outed herself first, and he was so mad, and he wrote a retaliation article, which then got pulled down because obviously...
Rebel Wilson's very good at standing up for herself, and I appreciate. I think
She was like,
she's
I'm not going to
such
take that. Yeah.
She's such a brilliant individual for that. She's actually done quite a few lawsuits. All in all, you're right. It's not owed to us.
And also, Love Simon, the author, felt like she was also forced to come out as bisexual because she was accused of profiting off queer stories. So by doing this kind of stuff and people doing the queer baiting and trying to attempt cancel culture and cancelling people, you're actually forcing people to do things that they're not ready to in a time frame that doesn't suit them. You're making them come out before they're ready.
In a world that if people didn't have to come out, then that wouldn't be an issue, wouldn't it? So really the world just has to change.
Yeah, and that's not going to change it.
Just that little thing.
Something as simple as changing the world. Should we still be using the term queer baiting?
I mean, I think that the idea of using the word queer baiting, it doesn't stop it being evident or not being evident. It's just putting a label on something that is evidently out there.
After all this negative discussion about representation in media, let's look at some shows that do it right. So some shows that do it right, we're looking at Atypical, Heartstopper, Sex Education, and even Wentworth was mentioned in there. It's an Aussie show.
Oh, Wentworth is bloody brilliant. Watch it.
Did we end up binging that? We binged that, yeah. So we do have popular media that is not afraid to put queer people and stories in their works, and hopefully there'll be more.
Yeah, that's the whole thing. There's a way to do it. There is a lot of programs out there that have showed that you can do it well, and it doesn't take that much effort. It's not like you need a media liaison for queer people out there to be like, oh no, this is appropriate. You just treat it like you would do any other character.
So there are shows there that are doing it right, and there are some shows that are doing it in a way just to profit.
I think we should do a thing on pink economy. I want to learn more about that.
That's what I was thinking as well. I was really interested. Maybe we could do a small talk on pink economy, the buying power of the LGBT community and that kind of stuff. So that was a longer episode. If you have gotten this far, thank you so much for listening all the way through.
Yeah, and that was queer baiting. All the interesting dynamic things behind queer baiting.
Until next time, thank you for listening. If you've liked what you've heard,
rate, review and subscribe.
Send us some messages. Let us know what you think. If you have any other ideas for some topics, please get in touch. But until next time, I hope that we have been
perfectly queer.